Picture this, a guy I'll call Andy, 47 years old, successful, happily married, healthy as a horse. No blood pressure issues, no diabetes, nothing. And one night, out of nowhere, he can't get an erection. Just nothing. He brushes it off, probably just tired, right? But then the next time he and his wife are getting intimate, something different happens. Instead of being present with her, his brain is running a full-blown commentary. Is it going to happen again? What if it doesn't work? What is she thinking right now? And sure enough, it doesn't work again. So what does Andy do? He starts watching a lot of football on Saturday nights, like a suspicious amount of football, because if he doesn't take his wife to dinner, she won't expect them to come home and have sex. And if there's no sex, he won't fail. Brilliant, right? Except now he's really lonely and she feels rejected and the ED isn't going anywhere. That's a cycle. And today we're cracking it wide open. Hi there, and welcome to the Great Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Heather England. I'm a coach, psychotherapist, and certified sex therapist. And I can't wait to get into yet another episode in my series on erectile dysfunction, because it is a topic I am extremely passionate about. Today's podcast is brought to you by my 2 on-demand online workshops on erectile dysfunction. The first is focused on mastering performance anxiety because it is hands down the top contributor to ED. The second is my workshop specifically designed for female partners of those with ED because partners need support too, and they're often so much left out of the conversation. I'm genuinely excited about both of these trainings, and the feedback I've gotten so far has been super. You can find the links in the show notes. Okay, so let's get into it. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while or you've done any reading on ED, you probably already know there are physical causes. In fact, I did an entire episode on that. Things like cardiovascular issues, diabetes, hormonal stuff. So we talked about that before. But today I want to focus on the psychological and relational side of ED because this is where things get really interesting. And honestly, this is where most of the work happens, especially the work we do in sex therapy. Here's the thing a lot of men don't realize. Most of these psychological factors don't just cause ED, they're also caused by ED. It's a vicious self-reinforcing cycle, and once you're in it, it can feel almost impossible to get out. But you can. I promise you can. Let's start with relationships because this one surprises people. Your partner is not the cause of your ED. I want to say that very clearly and very directly. They are not the cause of your ED, but they play a very massive role in your recovery. The emotional climate of your relationship matters enormously when it comes to your sexual functioning. Think about it. When there's poor communication in a relationship, when emotional intimacy is low, when there's been infidelity in the past and trust hasn't fully been rebuilt, when you two really have different expectations about sex, all of that creates a kind of low-grade tension that lives in the body. And that tension doesn't just disappear when you get into bed together. One of the things I see often is partners who misinterpret the ED. A woman will think, he doesn't find me attractive anymore. Or worse, she thinks he's having an affair. And instead of having a real conversation about it, she withdraws emotionally. He notices the withdrawal, feels more pressure, and the ED gets even worse. Nobody wins. Emotional intimacy is the foundation here. It's the feeling of closeness, of connectedness, that sense that you get that you've got each other's backs and you're not going to be judged for being vulnerable. You can truly show up in your relationship and trust that your partner is always going to be there for you, no matter what. You can say anything, do anything, and you know they'll have your back. So you feel completely safe, and that's why you can be vulnerable. Couples with high emotional intimacy are better at talking about sex. And talking about sex leads to better sex. Full stop. A lot of people don't know how to talk about sex, but the more you can talk about sex in your relationship, the better sex you will have. One of the great things that happened to my partner and I is because we were struggling with erectile dysfunction, it made us have lots of conversations about our sex life and what we wanted it to be. And these are conversations we really honestly didn't have before the ED came on the scene. And so it sounds crazy to say, but having ED helped us to develop this ability to really talk about sex and to expand our sex life and become much more creative around intimacy. So now let's switch to a different factor. Let's talk about stress because men seriously underestimate how stress impacts them. Work stress, financial stress, family stress, all of it. I can't tell you how many men come to me convinced that there must be something physically wrong because they're in good shape, they're not that old, their health is fine. And when we start peeling back the layers, well, they're working like 60-plus-hour weeks, they've got a sick parent, they're worried about money. Stress is not a minor inconvenience. It is a physiological event. It floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline, and those are not the hormones you need to get an erection. Some men actually use sex as a stress reliever, which can work beautifully. But if the stress is so intense that it impacts your sexual functioning, well, now you've got a new source of stress on top of the original stress. It compounds really fast. Depression is another big factor, and it's deeply connected to ED in both directions. So men with ED have a significantly higher risk of depression because of how it impacts their self-esteem. And men who are already depressed are twice as likely to experience ED. Depression lowers libido. It creates really negative self-talk about being a sexual person, and it makes everything feel heavier and more hopeless. If you're dealing with depression, please address that directly. It really matters. Major life changes can also trigger ED, and this one often blindsides people. And we're not just talking about hard things, we're talking about any significant transition, a new baby, a promotion, getting married, moving to a new city, a health diagnosis. Even positive changes can create psychological distress, and that distress can show up in the bedroom. I had a client one time who started experiencing ED right around the time he got a huge promotion at work. Life was really good on paper, but the pressure he felt to perform at this new level was immense, and it spilled right over into his sex life. I also had a client one time who had a really hard time getting an erection around the time that he and his wife wanted to conceive a child. And as we continued to peel back the layers and unpack that, it was clear that the stress he was feeling about becoming a father and his desire to be a different father than the one he had was contributing to his ED. And once he worked through that, he was able to maintain his erections. There's also the impact of sexual concerns in the relationship itself. If your partner has low desire and you two aren't having sex very often, you might feel like every sexual encounter has to be perfect, and that pressure is enormous. Or if there's premature ejaculation or pain during sex or difficulty with orgasm, those issues don't exist in a vacuum. They affect absolutely everything in your sexual relationship, and they can really be factors in ED. Now I want to spend a minute on something that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's shame. The beliefs we grow up with about sex from our families, our culture, our religion, they shape us in ways we don't always recognize. Some of those beliefs are just beautiful. A lot of them are really damaging. They create shame. And shame you might feel about ED, keeping it secret, hiding that you're taking medication, or not talking to your partner about what's going on inside your head. Well, that secrecy makes everything worse. Dr. Brene Brown was one of the people that really kind of made the topic of shame become everyday language for people. And she talks about shame needing secrecy and silence and judgment in order to grow. She says if you douse shame in empathy, it can't survive. And I believe that with my whole heart. The men who make the most progress with ED are almost always the ones who start talking about it to their partner, to a therapist, to someone. The silence is not protecting you, it's actually feeding the problem. Shame cannot survive if you talk about it. It needs silence in order to survive. There's also the issue of sexual knowledge or the lack of it in relationships. Men don't come with a manual. They often learn about sex from pornography, from friends bragging, from trial and error. And that creates a really unrealistic set of expectations. When reality doesn't match the highlight reel in their head, they can feel like failures. And that's low sexual self confidence, and it contributes to ED significantly. And then there's avoidance. Oh my gosh, avoidance is really sneaky. When a man experiences ED, the most natural human response is to want to avoid the situation that caused the pain. So he stops initiating. He pulls back from affection. Like I said at the top of the episode, our friend Andy was watching football on Saturday nights, so he wouldn't have to face the possibility of failing in bed again. But here's the problem with avoidance. It provides short-term relief, but long-term misery because you miss out on the chance to have sexual experiences that are pleasure and successful, experiences that don't even require a full erection to be wonderful. And that avoidance confirms to your brain that sex is somehow a threat, something to be feared. It actually reinforces your anxiety and keeps it alive. So avoidance is never the right thing to do when you have erectile dysfunction. If you continue to avoid intimacy, you are actually reinforcing the ED cycle. So now let's talk specifically about performance anxiety because it's the single most common psychological contributor to ED. Performance anxiety is essentially a worry spiral, and I've talked about this in several other podcasts, but I am going to repeat myself again in case you did not hear those podcasts. You might have one or two experiences where you couldn't get or maintain an erection and you're shocked. Like, of course you are. You can't believe it just happened. And so the next time you're in a sexual situation, your brain goes, but what if it happens again? And that anticipation creates anxiety. The anxiety interferes with the biological process of getting an erection. And now it happens again, and the cycle is confirmed. What's happening neurologically is that your brain is so focused on monitoring your penis, essentially standing on the sidelines with a clipboard taking notes, that you completely miss the actual experience. You aren't present in the moment. You miss out on those feelings of touch, the connection, the sensations, all the things that actually trigger your sexual arousal. We call them sexual cues. You're in your head instead of in your body in the moment, enjoying what's going on. Some men can brush off that first experience of ED, especially if they know it's common, and it is. Most men experience ED difficulties at some point in their lives. But for many men, that first experience sets up a pattern of performance anxiety and anticipatory anxiety that's really hard to break without support. And here's what I really want you to hear. The performance anxiety, the avoidance, the shame, the relationship tension, none of these things mean something is broken within you. None of them mean you're a failure as a man. They don't mean there's anything wrong with you. They mean you're human. They mean you had a difficult experience and your brain and your body responded the way brains and bodies do to difficult experiences. That is not a character flaw. You're not a failure. That's a cycle. And cycles can be interrupted. So in summary, today we covered the psychological and relational factors that contribute to ED, relationship dynamics and emotional intimacy, stress in all its forms, depression, life transitions, other sexual concerns, the beliefs and shames we carry about sex, performance anxiety, and that self-reinforcing cycle it creates. The common thread through all of this is this. Secrecy makes ED worse and connection makes it better. Talking about it, understanding it, and addressing it directly changes everything. So please talk to your partner or talk to a therapist, a certified sex therapist, somebody who is trained to be able to talk to you about this. Talk because it will change everything for you. Thanks so much for joining me for today's episode. I hope you learned a lot from it. Don't forget to subscribe, share the podcast with a friend who might enjoy it, and leave a positive review. That's what helps me be able to keep the podcast going. Until next time, my wish is for you to create a life filled with phenomenal relationships and fabulous sexual intimacy. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.